Dust swirled around, creating mysterious beams of light in the dark workshop as Betty quietly opened the heavy, creaking door. It's Saturday morning. Betty lets out a deep sigh. She really has to do it now. The workshop must be empty, and the items must be sold. She desperately needs the money. Her husband left her nothing. But the discovery Betty made that early Saturday morning completely changed her mind about her late husband. When Betty finally managed to make her way into Wilbert's workshops, she quickly noticed that some things were not right. There was a thick layer of dust on everything, except for a spot on the ground next to the workbench. This had been moved recently. Betty's son Mike helped her move the bench into the dust-free area on the ground, revealing a trap door hidden below it. Betty had no idea this was here. Without any hesitation, Mike opened it up, revealing what was hidden behind it. Betty could barely believe what she was seeing. Wilbert had been hiding what he was truly doing in the workshop and lying to her for years. But what did Mike and Betty find behind the hidden trap door, and why had Wilbert been lying to his wife for all these years? Before we start our story, smash the like button, make sure to subscribe and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new stories. 2 weeks after Betty's husband passed away, and Betty was still quite far from moving on, everything about her home, their home, reminded her of his smell and presence. Moreover, she was yet to discard his stuff, and seeing that she couldn't just move on without discarding his stuff, she started the process. At first, she didn't quite know where to start. The bedroom was where they spent the most amount of time together, and she felt starting from there might be so hard that it will demotivate her. So she started from the kitchen, did the living room, bathroom, and then the bedroom. Done with the whole house, she had just one more place to work on, his workshop in the shed right behind the house. Unlike every other place she had worked on that held the existence of other people as well, the workshop was all him. Everything about the shed was all him, but she had to clean it up. Betty's husband had taken to the workshop right after his retirement. He was there every day and always spent so much in there. Betty never knew what he did in the workshop, and he never showed her either, but it made him really happy working in there. So happy that Betty never bothered to find out what he was up to. Moreover, the few times she had asked him what he was up to, his response had always been that he was tinkering some old machines, and it was a great way to keep himself engaged after his retirement. Sitting still in front of the TV all day was never his thing. He was a man who liked to keep busy. Having fully prepared herself mentally, Betty set towards the workshop with boxes to help discard his stuff. And on getting there, she saw that the place was locked up and she had absolutely no idea where he had kept the key. She didn't even know that there was a lock. Disappointed to find a lock, she decided to give up on the shed. Moreover, she had no use for the shed, but curiosity wouldn't let her be. Why would Wilbert have the place locked up if he was just tinkering with some old machines? Betty couldn't help but wonder if Wilbert did more than just tinker. This, her inability to forget about the shed, went on for a week. She was now too curious to forget about the shed and the workshop that she had not been inside for roughly 10 years, so she called the local lockpick to come help her with the door, while she wondered why she had never thought of going inside for 10 years. The lock was of an old model, one the lockpicker was quite familiar with, and he had no issue picking the lock when he came around the next day. He was done in a matter of minutes and was off after Betty paid him for his service. Alone with the workshop, it was time to see what her husband had been up to all this while. Everything in the workshop looked exactly as it should in a workshop, although she thought the place was more unorganized, but then, Wilbert had never been one to care much about organizations. Tools, wood chips, and old machines were in total chaos, making it difficult for her to find her way around. As she moved further into the workshop, she couldn't help but notice that the place was dustier than it should have been. Wilbert had died just 3 weeks ago, and the amount of dust on the things in here was definitely not 3 weeks old. It was almost as if the workshop had not been used in years. It didn't make sense to her because he was always in here for hours each day. So what had he been doing if he wasn't working on the machines or with the tools? As she wandered around the workshop, trying to make sense of the thick layers of dust, She noticed a spot that wasn't half as dusty as the other spots. The spot was on the floor. It was a big square spot next to a small workbench that looked like it had been moved recently. Unable to move the bench as she wasn't so strong to lift such heavy objects, she called her son Mike and asked him to come by if he had enough spare time to help her out with something. In a matter of hours, Mike came by. Betty sat him down and told him about her experience with the workshop. She led the curious son to the workshop and pointed at the workbench that she needed him to move. Mike excitedly moved the bench away from the spot to reveal something. It was an entrance to a trap door. Mother and son were surprised to see a trap door in the workshop. Mike opened the trap door, which wasn't locked, to reveal a staircase going down. They had absolutely no idea what to make of this. Where on earth did the stairs lead to, and what was in there? With Mike leading the way and helping Betty find her way, they both made their way to the end of the stairs. The stairs led them to a narrow tunnel which they followed, and after a while, they stumbled onto another flight of stairs going upward. Still curious, they took the stairs and up they went. On finally getting up, they were stunned to find themselves in a garage that had just one classy-looking car. Whose garage was this, and why was there a path from her house that led here, Betty wondered. Mike inspected the car and found the keys in the ignition. Mike hopped into the car and started it. Once he did, the built-in navigation and dashboard came on. Looking at them, he realized that there was a preloaded route programmed in it. The trip was a 30 minutes drive, and right that second, mother and son knew the next thing to do. Betty got into the passenger seat, while Mike used the small remote in the car to open up the garage door. As they drove out the garage, Betty finally had an answer to one of her numerous questions. She knew where they were, but she didn't know where they were headed. The garage belonged to one of the houses in their neighborhood which was up for sale. The house had been on the market for so long without finding a buyer. At one point, she had been interested in buying the house but couldn't find a listing for it. Now, she was here. Why had Wilbert been connected to the house? What was the path from her home doing here? Questions swirled in her head as Mike drove silently, likely pondering his own. After half an hour, they reached another old house near the city limits. Like the first, it was up for sale. Betty observed its deteriorating state. It clearly needed significant work to be sellable. Mike checked the house, knocking on the door and peering through windows but found no way in. He decided to ask the neighbors, while Betty examined the car nearby. Inside the glove box, she found a large black bag. Heavy and unusual, it piqued her curiosity. Opening it, she froze. Bundles of $100 bills filled the bag, along with multiple driver's licenses, all with her late husband's photo but different names. The shock unsettled her. Could she have been unaware of who he really was? Mike returned, and with keys from the bag, managed to open the house's front door. They paused, unsure if they should call the police, deciding instead to learn more before taking the next step. There had to be answers inside. Mike and Betty nervously stepped into the rundown house, locking the door behind them. The dim light filtering through the boarded windows revealed an interior as neglected as the outside. Mike turned on his phone's flashlight to guide their search for any connection to Wilbert, their deceased family member. The house seemed abandoned for years, but they knew better. Carefully, they scoured the rooms for hidden compartments, recalling the secret hatch they'd found earlier. When their search yielded no results, Mike suggested checking upstairs. Exhausted, Betty stayed behind, sinking into a dusty couch. Left alone, Betty's thoughts consumed her. Anger and frustration boiled over as she considered how much Wilbert had hidden from her. His secrets had left her without closure, and she doubted she'd ever understand his true life. Suddenly, Mike's excited shout broke her reverie. Rushing upstairs, Betty found him in a dimly lit bedroom, standing before a painting on the wall. She stepped closer, and her heart skipped a beat. It was a pristine portrait of their family, inexplicably preserved in this decaying house. Mike removed the painting, revealing a hidden safe with an envelope taped to its surface. Inside was a letter from Wilbert, explaining everything. They read it together in disbelief. It felt like a movie plot. Wilbert confessed to working with criminals to support their family. What began as an accidental encounter with a squatter in a rental property he'd secretly purchased spiraled into a web of dealings with organized criminals. He used the house as a safe haven for their operations, earning money from his risky endeavor. The letter continued, revealing that in his final years, Wilbert had sold off assets and hidden the proceeds in this house to keep the government from seizing them. At the bottom of the page was a safe combination. Mike entered the code and opened the safe, revealing a fortune. Stunned, Betty grappled with what to do. Reporting it to the authorities crossed their minds, but didn't feel right. Wilbert's intention was clear. He wanted them to live securely. With the money in hand and the cherished family portrait, they resolved to honor his wish.